Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Today we're diving into the world of air traffic control, and I'm really excited because this is a new domain for me, and I get to dive into something new and learn some new stuff. But before we get there, we're getting very close to Ergonomics in Human Factors 2024, the CIHF annual ergonomics conference. And at the time of recording, the full program has just gone live, and it's really inspiring to see that there's now 4 tranches of talks going on. So the days of the conference, they're going to be really busy, but they're going to be really enjoyable. It's going to be so fab to catch up with people and see what people have been up to. Not to mention that actually the awards conference, the awards are back on this year, and they're part of the annual dinner. They're not a separate event, and being hosted by yours truly. And if you think, hold on, he hosted it last year, then yeah, you're right. And by a weird quirk of fate, I'm hosting it again next year, but I'll explain all in at another time for anybody who's that interested. So let's get back to air traffic control. This episode is a response, or perhaps a continuation, a better way of putting it, of a webinar hosted by NATS here in the UK, where I spoke with Nuno and Fran about human factors in air traffic control. We thought it'd be fun to do another one. They clearly didn't have enough of me and didn't want to throw me out the room. I really wanted to get into exploring the basics of human factors. So if you're not somebody who follows NATS closely or never really got into air traffic control, I really wanted to bring that out because it's super interesting, and what they're asking operators to do, just from my limited knowledge at the moment, seems quite intense. There's a lot going on. It almost like the allusion to 4D chess seems to come to mind. So I really wanted to get the perspectives from both the human factor side of things from Nuno, but also understand more about the role of a user from Fran. So we're going to be going to hopefully back to basics about what an operator has to do and some of the project improvements that have gone along the way. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Nuno, Cebola, and Fran Slater. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us, Barry.
So, Nuno, if we can start with you, if that's okay, just to guide us in, what's your current role and what do you get up to on a day-to-day basis?
So my current role is Director of Human Factors and Wellbeing. So I look after both human factors and the wellbeing activities for NATS. I think most of my day-to-day is dealing with people one way or the other. Less perhaps now on a technical basis, talking about the intricacies of human factors, but more about providing guidance and direction, unblocking issues, making sure that we are coordinated with the right people, making sure that we have the right stakeholders in the room to make the right decisions, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so how did you get involved in human factors to begin with? I mean, everybody has their story of, you came across it just one day doing it. How did you find it?
Similar to most people, I think I stumbled upon HF. I did my master's in the Netherlands, University of Leiden, and one of the modules was human error. And it was Patrick Watterson, something like that. He used to work for Shell, and he was an HF person. And I was fascinated by the stuff that he was doing with discipline and the big focus on addressing design issues, improving safety, those sorts of things. And I was sort of hooked. So from then it was trying to find a way to move from my psychology background into an HF type environment. And that took a couple of years to arrange, but I ended up doing an internship at Eurocontrol with Barry Cohen, who's still there. This was back in 2007, 2008. And from there it just sort of took off, and then Barry introduced me to John Wilson. I ended up doing a PhD with John Wilson at the University of Nottingham in human factors. And then I progressed with John. John had a very close working relationship with Edward Grohl. So I found a position at Edward Grohl, and then from then on, I moved to Thales for a number of years, and then eventually joined NATS, always doing HF.
Cool. So you've managed to meet basically all the large names, the large celebrities across your career. That's quite phenomenal.
Not quite all of them, but some of them.
Brilliant.
Neville Stenton, I don't know Neville very well.
Fran, if we could turn to you. So what's your current role? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
I hope you've got about 3 hours for this call, Barry, because I could talk for quite a long time. So my official title is Deputy Operations Supervisor. So I, along with the operations supervisor, I'm like the number 2 in command, look after a whole watch of controllers and manage the terminal control room. So in the terminal control room are all the controllers who look after the piece of airspace in the southern England that I always try and describe as a big circle. If you think of a big circle that begins sort of around Birmingham and goes out sort of just past Reading and down round Southampton and then out round sort of towards Dover and Kent and up that way past Clacton, back over the top of Stansted and up towards Birmingham. Anything in that bit, the controllers in my room are likely to be talking to the planes from anywhere, either sort of 20,000 feet or 25,000 feet, depending on the different bits of airspace. So my job day to day is to manage the controllers who are managing that airspace and talking to those planes in terms of managing the safety of the operation, managing the service delivery so that we've got the right number of aircraft coming in so that people aren't too busy, but that we've got enough coming in that we're not causing delay when we don't need to, managing and delivering training, making sure that people are being able to be upskilled to the jobs they need to do. And managing those traffic levels, managing safety and looking after the people. I look after a watch full of people. So everything from their sort of personal lives and annual leave to, whether they've got the correct qualifications and whether they need to train or extend. So it's quite a varied role. And I can be doing anything from sorting a roster out 1 minute to dealing with an aircraft emergency and telephone calls regarding that, 10 seconds later. So it's a fascinating role and I really love it.
Brilliant. So I guess when I talk to HF people, I'm like, I've got a fair idea probably how you got into your role. We all fall into it, etc., etc. But an air traffic control, how do you get into? Did you just wake up at school one day and say, yes, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life?
No, I'm a bit of a weirdo in some respects. I never do anything about air traffic at all. And so there are lots of people in air traffic who've always loved it, always knew what they wanted to do from a very early age. I had no idea. I did a maths degree at university, and I was coming to the end of university and needing a job and didn't really know what to do. I had now lovely husband, was obviously my partner at that stage, and he was very aviation orientated. He'd been looking at the RAF, always wanted to fly, flies privately now and things like that. So and he said to me, "Oh, you'd be really good at ATC," and I said, ATC, what's that? And we tuned a scanner into Manchester tower controllers and listened to what was going on. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I sent off a job application to NATS amongst the other 183 applications I sent off at the end of my final university year looking for a job. And it was the CAA at that stage. They were the first people to reply and offer me the interview and the first people to offer me a job. So I thought, oh, well, give it a go, see what happens. If I like it, great. And if I don't like it, I'll do something else. And I think it's fairly safe to say that 28 and a half years later, still doing it, I pretty much loved it. It's a brilliant job. You start by sort of training in the basics of air traffic control, and the training course as it was run at the time trained me to be an aerodrome controller, a tower controller, and then I went on to train to be a radar controller. You do a basic sort of set of training in our colleges, our various training institutions, which give you sort of the generics of how air traffic works, and then you go on to go and train live at a unit and learn all about the specifics of the pieces of airspace that you work in, or the specifics of the tower if you were working there. So I did that and trained on that. That took me sort of just over 18 months. So 1999, I qualified as an air traffic controller. I became a TMA South controller, which means if you think of an East-West line through Heathrow, I used to talk to all the bits that just down there. I controlled for 24 years. After about 7 of those, first of all, I became what was known as a group supervisor, which is the first level of supervisory staff. So you manage a small group of the sectors, making sure the traffic is right within the bigger strategy that's done within the room, but you keep controlling as well. You become, so you spend some of your days doing radar controlling and some of your days supervising and making sure the sectors are appropriately managed and not too busy. And then just last year, I took the step up to go to the higher level supervisory, which sadly meant I stopped doing radar, which is a shame because I did love talking to pilots and love talking to planes, but it allows me to make a bigger difference and be more involved in the sort of strategic way of managing the business, which I really enjoy.
Cool. So in amongst that time, when did you first become aware of human factors and ergonomics, and or have you? Or you only found out the other week when we did the.
No, I think it's been fascinating to watch the growth of it through air traffic in the time that I've been in it. When I first arrived in NATS, CIA as it was then, the controlling had just started to be split into different rooms, and the way our traffic works is rather complicated, but we start with a set of airspace and people control it, and we have certain procedures. And then, usually we find that things need to develop and we want to put more aircraft in. So we either divide the airspace differently or we divide the tasks differently, and we use more controllers then to do that. And so they've recently done a new project to split part of the controlling into the two different rooms that we have now. So we have area control that does the higher level stuff and the stuff that's further out from London, and the terminal control room, which is where I work. But in the olden days, the area controllers' radar screens were tabletop flat. So, and at the time, they'd realised that there were huge problems with people sort of having to work like that constantly, and back problems and neck problems. So straight away, there was an ergonomics issue that began to be fixed with the new generation of radars. And then all the way through my career, I've seen the human factors side of things and the ergonomics side of things built into what we do. Every time we've got new equipment or new airspace, or we get those designs in. I think one of the biggest ones I had involvement was we got a new voice comms, a new communication system, which sort of linked to how we get our radio to talk to the planes and our telephone lines. And so simple things like making sure that whichever sector you were sat on, certain telephone lines were always in the same place, so that you gained a muscle memory that if you needed to talk to, say, Heathrow, you would press that button and that button would be there no matter where you were sitting, so that sort of element came in there. And certainly it's involved in everything from how we work together in terms of TRM, in terms of procedure changes, in terms of incident investigation when things don't quite go right, whether we've got new procedure changes. I mean, it's everywhere now, and it's been really nice to see the growth of those. And I mean, one of the latest things they're working on that I've been involved in is sort of workload thing. They're taking workload surveys and trying to correlate how hard controllers are working with some of the other tools we have to see if we can better predict when we need to split sectors or manage traffic differently to make sure the controllers are comfortable. So it's an ongoing partnership with human factors all the time, and it makes a huge difference to what we do.
So I just want to know. Sorry, Nuno, I spoke of you.
No, I'm not sure if you need me here. Fran is doing a really good job at talking about all the things that my team does.
Right, we're going to take a really quick break, but then we're going to come back and really dive into the human factors aspects a bit more. So we'll be back right after this.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. We're here with Nuno, Cebola and Fran, Slater, both from NATS, and we're learning about air traffic control. So, Fran, just before the break, you were giving us a bit of an insight into the sort of things you sort of got up to in your career. But I guess to situate the discussion, could you just run through, I guess, at a really, I would say, basic level for people like me, what an operator does on a sort of a day-to-day basis? What do you have to interact with? What are you trying to achieve?
So the ultimate aim of air traffic control is to allow all the people that want to fly safely and get where they want to go with as little disruption and as little delay as possible. There are different types of air traffic controllers. You will have air traffic controllers who work in control towers. They will manage the runways and the movements on an airfield or an airport. They will give instructions to taxi, instructions to take off, and instructions to land, and they're very much managing that local bit. You will have approach controllers. That's a very specialized function where they take aircraft from certain arrival routes or holding areas and vector them onto a stream onto the final approach. So if you ever see something like Big Jet TV and they're watching the ones coming in at Heathrow one by one, approach controllers will be the ones putting those aircraft in that stream to make sure that they're coming down with the minimum gap required, the maximum gap required, the best gaps available to land the maximum number of aircraft to allow the tower controller to do their job and achieve as little delay as possible for the aircraft and get them where they want to be safely. And then there are area controllers, which is the job that I did. And that is where you will have people sat in front of a radar screen, like a large TV screen, really, where every aircraft will be represented by a little asterisk on the screen. And we'll have bits of information about that aircraft on the screen and bits of information in front of us. In the old days, that was very much on pieces of paper that we used to write on, and now it's in a much better, certainly more modern system. We're on an electronic system now that we interact with, and we give instructions to aircraft to climb, to descend, to turn, to route to different waypoints, and we're there basically to make sure that. I always say it to people, I'm there to get all the inbound traffic into their airport and all the outbound traffic away from the airport without the two meeting up with each other. That's the role in essence.
So just to dive a little bit more into that then, if I'm sat at one of your area control stations, what am I seeing? What you said you've got a screen to play with.
Oh, I've got lots of screens.
That's what I'm getting into. Every photo I've seen and every, you see it on the movies and things like that as well. There just seems to be lots of information. You have to watch like 10 screens at once, and there's people passing things off to each other. And the allusion to 4D chess or something like that doesn't seem to be that far removed, because the whole thing is dynamic and you can't just press pause at any point. Is that a true reflection?
It is. I've never quite got the 4D chess personally, mainly because I'm rubbish at chess. But it's a giant logic puzzle every day. And what we've got to do is keep planes apart by a prescribed amount. So we either keep them 3 miles apart or we keep them 1,000 feet apart. And we want to allow them to route on the way they route. So I have a screen in front of me that will show me where the aircraft are, and then that screen will give me information about the aircraft's call sign, the aircraft's height, perhaps its exit point, whether it's climbing or descending, things like that. And that will correlate to another screen that I have in front of me that's sort of lower level but slightly tilted up. Sorry, I'm using my hands and realize you can't see them, but sort of slightly tilted up like that. And that will have on an electronic version of strips, which, as I say, used to be a piece of paper, but is now, sort of an electronic version of that. And that gives us details again about the aircraft call sign, its type, where it's going, all the information we need to know what we've actually got to do with that aircraft. We split our things into split our areas into sectors, and those sectors might be sort of geographical or they might be vertical, so that we make sure that controllers aren't working too many planes. So every time a plane is going to leave your piece of airspace, your little bit that you control, you have to make sure the next controller is aware of it, and knows that it's coming, and knows what level it's coming at, and knows what point it's coming at, so that they can make sure that they can put that into their plan. We have a lot of information around us. We have information about weather. We have information about what departures are coming from other airfields, but it all ties in really well together. And when you train, you learn to sort of scan things in a way that suits you. Right. So you pick up all. And again, things like when we went to electronic strips, I know that human factors were heavily involved in the design of that and how that could link some of the information so that we no longer needed to search for bits of information, and it would be presented in front of us in the best way to be able to enable us to do our job and manage more planes safely. And I think it's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you. Nuno, from your perspective, how has the human factors challenge evolved in ATC? What are the things hitting your desk? Most recently, the big hitters that you're trying to address.
I think it's a mix. I think we still see the same sort of what I would call traditional HF issues, as Fran described there. Loads of design, loads of assurance, loads of working with our users to try and identify the best way to get the systems to support what they need to do. We still see a lot of that. And it has moved on as well a little bit in terms of finding different ways to, one, support the staff, and two, making sure that we are getting ready for what the future might bring. Yeah, so it's really mixed. It's a lot of the traditional HF stuff. We are seeing a lot more, and I think this is perhaps specific to ATC or the aviation industry, where through regulation and what ICAO and other sort of international organizations think HF is, we have seen a move much more from the traditional HF of design and assurance to a focus on human performance, which is much more focused on the individual. So I can see Fran nodding. Some of the things that we started doing off the back of that are things like we have a human performance coaching program, which is like a normal coaching activity, but very much focused on ATC and the needs of our operational staff, helping them develop the confidence, resilience, communication, teamworking skills that will help on the day-to-day to do the job faster, better, cheaper, as you could put it. We do lots in terms of providing and delivering training for new air traffic controllers that are coming through the college. So we are mandated to provide human factors training to anyone that works in ATC. It's one of the IK regulations. What goes into that training, we have a bit more flexibility in terms of what we put in there. So we see a lot of evolution in that space in terms of trying to get people to understand what HF is and how they can apply it on their day-to-day, and also to recognize HF issues and raise a hand and say, we need a hand with this. So that's still ongoing. In terms of what's new, and there's no surprises here, automation, AI are sort of the words of the decade, the century, I'm not sure. So there's a lot of noise around that. There's a lot of work trying to automate simplified tasks that the controllers currently do. I think the big challenge for us there is getting people to understand that you can't just automate everything. That's point one. Automating, it's not just about taking tasks away from the controllers, it's taking the right tasks away from the controllers. There's no point saying, we can automate this, but you just need to monitor it to make sure that it's doing what it needs to do. There's no point. Yeah, PBS route is one of the examples that springs to mind, Fran. Great idea, but it needs to reach a point where you can't ask the control to make sure that everyone's following their predetermined routes, because you won't. Your brain will engage with other activities. Then there's things like big data and AI. As time progressed, our systems have been able to capture and collect all sorts of data that we are still struggling to make sense of. So if we wanted to, we could look at one of Fran's sessions and how fast she's clicking every button, how quick she's responding to any RT radio telephony messages coming from pilots or other positions or airports. We will have a wealth of data coming out of our systems that we are simply not making use of in the way that we could. And it's a big data problem. It's how we get that data out from the system in real time, how do we analyze and present it back in a way that's useful. So the future is bright. One of the things we're trying to do in the next 12 months or so is try to identify some key proxies within that sea of data for things like workload. So hopefully, if we speak in 12 months' time, I'll sit here saying we have identified a lovely proxy in one of our various systems that gives us a really good indication of workload for controllers like Fran, and then we can feed that data real time, maybe not next year, this year, and we can start making decisions real time on that to reduce incidents and events. And perhaps Fran will go into that in a minute. I'm sure it's not a pleasant experience to have a safety incident or something that could have a serious safety consequence. So we're trying to move away from all of that stuff and provide better data, better quality, faster, to our control so we can make better decisions.
So, Fran, from your perspective, you've already given us a bit of an insight about how you've observed human factors as part of your work. How have you been involved? Have you been involved in sort of the human factors on a face-to-face? So have you been involved in any of the consultancy, any of the activities, and how have you found doing that if you have?
Yeah, so as I say, only from within a project, when something's being developed, when we have a major airspace change or a new piece of equipment coming in, the human factors team will be there alongside us at kind of design and checking with us around that kind of element. So I've been involved where they will ask our opinions on how things work and the best way of making something work and that kind of thing. And, we talked about, particularly when we put in new airspace procedures and things like that, is it something that's going to be easy to remember? Does it conflict with other things that we already do? Does it, are you, if you get too busy and you want to revert to something, is it going to revert to the same things you always revert to, or have you got to try and remember something new and things like that? So I've been involved in it from that point of view, and from quite a long time I've also was a watch training manager, so I was in charge of all of the new trainees who were coming through training live on our sectors on our particular watch, and the human performance, the sort of resilience, confidence building sort of training that Nuno described earlier has been absolutely critical in that. Training is it's a very hard thing to do in our business. It's a difficult thing to do because it's obviously very serious, and it can be at times quite pressured. And in the early days it's a little bit like when you first learn to drive a car. When you first learn to drive a car, you have to think, I'm going to press the clutch, put the car into first gear, let off the handbrake, then I'm going to start driving, and I'm going to, you have to think about every step. It's the same with air traffic. When you first start learning the nuances of a sector or how to control, you have to think really carefully about everything you do. And yet, obviously, we also want to move the planes, and we don't want to hold people up because I'm a bit slower driving than the person who's been doing it for 20 years. So, we have we train people gradually on quieter sectors, but building up their sort of confidence and their resilience and their ways of how to manage the sector for themselves is a really difficult thing to do. And that's something that the human performance side of things has really helped with. And almost all of our students now, they go through a package of training together, but they can also have some individual sort of work done, which kind of helps them learn how they best learn, how they develop, and then adapt that to the ways that we need to teach them, within our environment, and how we can best help them to achieve what we need, because we need lots more controllers, and the more we get, the better it is for everyone. And we're never going to be able to manage all the planes coming in the future if we don't have the next generation coming through. So it's very important.
And if you go to the NATS website, I'm sure the job adverts are up there waiting to be filled.
They probably are. I think recruitment is just about to open again in the spring for air traffic controllers, if you are interested.
I've got a guilty secret here that I like seeing on TikTok, where you have you basically can watch the interactions or listen to the interactions between air traffic controllers and pilots.
Yeah.
How do you find that? Because I guess there is that whole piece around you don't necessarily know who you're talking to. You've got to remain that because you're providing that sort of professional service. But then, obviously the ones that make it to social media and things like that are perhaps things that have maybe not got quite as well as it should have done.
Yeah.
How do you sort of manage to sort of compose yourself at times when you see some of these things coming in?
I think, well, we're all human beings, aren't we, at the end of the day, and we love to talk to each other and we love to interact. And there's a really good respect level between, the pilots and what they have to do and controllers and what they have to do. And we all know that we don't always get it right. Even if it's something as simple as someone, if you transfer a pilot from one frequency to the next and then they forget to flick the button in the cockpit and end up speaking back to you again. And, I usually ended up saying something flippant like, that's really lovely, but you need to flick the switch. And they would laugh, and the pilots would laugh, and and we know that, but it's just a general. I'm not going to tell him off for that. He's a human being, or she's a human being. They've made a mistake that's not critical. It's not caused a major problem, and so we deal with that. And there's always, we are still very polite. We do still say hello and goodbye to each other, even though, our tea time is tight, but it helps us to maintain that kind of level of communication between each other and understand that we're both doing a job. And yeah, there'll always be fun things that, you do see the ones where the pilot was going to propose to his girlfriend over the airwaves and things like that, which, happens more in America, where sometimes some of their sectors and some of their airports have sort of slightly quieter frequencies and you've got a bit more time. And I think, when things are quiet, we can have a little bit of those interactions. We get to know some pilots, so you do sometimes know who the voice on the other end is. You actually know them, so you might say hello, or you might say nice trip, or occasionally you get pilots who've not spoken to each other for a while, hearing each other and saying a quick hello. And as long as that's not disrupting anything that we're doing, that's not necessarily a major issue. And at the end of the day, we have to be professional. The aircraft have to move and we have a job to do. So if we need to stop it, we will stop it, because other things need instructions, and we'll just get on with that. But it's always nice, I think, to remember that we're all there working together to try and provide the best for the passengers who want to get from A to B as quickly as possible for whatever reason.
No, that's fair. And yeah, I'll still keep watching them things because I think they're brilliant.
I love them too.
So, Nuno, when we did the webinar last time, I think we got a lot of questions from other domains interested in the work that you're doing from an ATC perspective. So What do you think the stuff that you're doing now, or the stuff you've learned doing human factors in ATC, would be transferable to other domains? What can other domains learn from you?
Oh, everything, and vice versa. I think, I started in the railways. Well, I started in aviation with Eurocontrol back in the day. Then spent a lot of time in the railways before coming back to aviation. It is exactly the same from a human factors perspective, and I think it's one of the powers of our discipline. The skills, the knowledge that you bring can be applied in any domain. I think what is perhaps more interesting to share from the aviation side is sort of the human performance elements. Traditional HF design assurance, same tools. We use the same tools as anybody else would use in nuclear, oil and gas, healthcare, whatever. Or we can. There are some tools that have been designed specifically for aviation, and Barry Cohen and Steve Sherrock have done a lot of work in that space over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So there are a number of tools that they and others have developed specifically for aviation, but they can be used in many other domains. The principles are the same. I think what's perhaps a little bit more on the innovative side is the human performance aspect. So the human performance coaching that we've developed in-house, as far as I know, I haven't seen that being developed anywhere else. That's focused on understanding the job of the controller, be able to say, we know the job well enough that we can abstract and bring some HF occupational psychology principles to help these people be more confident in what they're doing, overcome some of their obstacles in terms of being mental blocks or struggling with a specific tool or task or specific training area, and really sort of give them the tools to overcome that and learn from that experience. I think that's sort of the innovative side. I think the other area that we're really trying to push forwards, and again, I'm not sure if others have cracked it or ahead of us, it's really trying to use big data to move us forwards. So we recently got a fantastic person into the team called Dr. Jed Clark, came from Southampton University. He sort of bridges the gap between HF and data analytics. He does a lot of neuro-linguistic programming, lots of sort of machine learning. So he's really helping us move away from crunching numbers by hand and be able to step into that space. So one of the things we do every 2 years or so is we do a safety culture survey across the whole of NATS. And then you do some grounded theory analysis. We have loads of qualitative and quantitative data. It takes us 4 to 6 weeks to analyze the data. He created this NLP piece that I did in like a day and a half. And I think that's sort of where we are moving towards, is that realm of big data and having the tools and the knowledge that we are picking from other disciplines to really start moving faster into that domain, really accelerating what we do and bring that expertise faster into the business.
I think there's lots of, sorry, Barry, I was just going to say that there'll be lots of comparable professions where you are, even if the technical elements are very different, the way that people have to work will be very similar. We work in what, lots of people will say, oh, is air traffic really stressful because it's got that role of being, I've never found it stressful, but it is pressured. There are times you have to make very critical decisions very quickly with certain information, and learning about how we assimilate information and how to, overcome, if there's something we've been learned about recently called the startle effect, where if something isn't quite as you expect and it takes you aback and stops you thinking very clearly, very quickly, and how your reactions to that and what that might mean for what actions you might take as a result. That sort of thing, I would imagine, could be transferable to all sorts of environments where things could change very quickly, a healthcare environment, or like you say, a railway environment, or so that the buttons you press or the actual machinery you're using or the tools you use may be different from different professions, but how humans react when they're under pressure and in different situations and how well they're trained, that's got to be applicable in lots of places, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think you're right, and the ability for us as a profession to share them lessons, to share them, or even just point out that actually they may be very different, but actually you're quite similar. That's why I think it was quite interesting when we did the webinar that so many people from healthcare were mentioning it, because I know that there's lots of really good people in healthcare, but they don't have as much, or it seems like they don't have as much opportunity to share best practice, and that's something I guess we all need to work on. And there must be other professions like that as well. The other thing you mentioned there was the look of human performance, or the term human performance, and it's when I've spoken to Stephen Shorrock in the past. He sort of challenged me to, or challenged us as a profession to sort of say, well, is human factors the right term? Should we be breaking it out a bit? Should we be less? I sort of describe the Ming Vase type of approach. We hold things a bit too tightly that we kind of maybe restricting ourselves. Do you think that we hung up by the name, or do you think it's fine?
I may have had this conversation with you before, but I had a conversation with Steve about 10 times, and I think we generally vehemently agree with each other. So I'm in the same space. I think we as a discipline have sort of almost grown organically, and we just keep adding. And it's, in my view, it's reached a point where we are trying to be everything, and perhaps failing to be what it is that we want to be, if we even know what it is we want to be as a discipline. I have a lot of issues with terminology in general. I'm not a big fan of human performance, but it's sort of the term that's stuck in aviation. So I've adopted it and I use it. I have loads of issues with the terminology of human error. I think it's for human factors what theory is for the theory of evolution, where it's just a theory. No, the theory science has a different connotation to what it has in outside of science, and I think human error is the same. People will point to the human made a mistake, it's their fault. And I think one of the biggest challenges for me on the day-to-day still, and has been forever, is to try and explain to people, no, it's not, because that's the start. Why did the human make that decision? We need to keep going, finding the root cause, because it's the system view. And I don't think we'll help ourselves with some of the language we use. One of the things we're trying to do in that space, other than the education piece and trying to be clearer on language, we are trying to move away from human error, this terminology. We're trying to talk more about resilience, human resilience. Just I think it helps. It moves away from that loaded term that people will associate with a specific idea they have in their minds. And the other thing we're trying to do is trying to identify, and I think we have done this as a discipline since inception, is trying to identify areas of the discipline that we can outsource to others.
Okay.
And one of the things we are doing is creating these sets of principles. So we have some automation principles, we have some unified traffic management principles, we have HMI design principles, and we have a few others on the making, which is to move us away from being the one person in the room that can provide some input into the activity and say, actually, no, these are the key things that we are concerned about from a human factors side. If you keep a watch on these, for a small project, low risk, you don't actually need to come to me. You're quite happy for you to carry on. And we'll release my team to be focused on the things that are, the big problems, and moving us forward in terms of future strategy, automation, AI, all those things that might be coming over the horizon. And I think it's critical for us as a discipline to really sort of decide the things that actually we could do that, or you can pass it along, and actually what we're going to focus on is the other stuff here. And the prime example for me in my head is the SE assessments. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 40, 50, 60 years ago, it was a domain of human factors to look at visual screen displays and do the assessments, make sure the ergonomics is correct. We standardize that. Yeah, there are documents, there are standards, the health and safety executive knows it. We don't need to do it. Other people can do it. I think there's loads more in our HF bucket, gigantic bucket, that we can go, actually, we don't need to do that anymore. There's enough information that we can leave someone to pick it up, and we'll focus on the next bit.
It's almost like the child that has now grown up and is now out in the world and can look after itself, but just occasionally has to come back and have its own dinner, I guess.
That's a nice analogy. You're the proud parent that needs to let go, Barry.
I was going to say the analogy is about to disappear somewhere where I didn't want it to go, so I'm going to swiftly move on. Fran, you mentioned the training that you get as an operator. From what you've described, having that, from day one, sitting down in the seat, you've gone through your initial training. The day when you sit down in the seat, that's got to be terrifying. How do you, what is the training that you get that allows you to cope with basically a live area or sector, and give you the confidence to do it? And what support have you got in place behind you for, I guess, when you might make that initial, you've got to make your first mistake, haven't you, I guess?
Of course, yeah, that's bound to happen. You're training. If you were perfect the moment you started, we'd have hundreds of controllers straight away. We'd never have any issues, would we? So I think that, you do this initial training at the college, and that will involve an element of simulator training, and it will involve an element of bookwork learning. That there are all sorts of laws and rules and regulations that we need to be aware of, and the way sort of air traffic units interact with each other and the things that we have to do. In the old days, we used to learn them by rote. I can still spout some of those things that I learned 29 years ago. I won't bore you with them now, but so you start with that, and then when you move to your unit will have a specific simulator course. I don't know how it works in aerodromes, I'll be honest. I'm not very au fait with their training, but from an area point of view and an approach point of view, you will go and do a simulator course, which basically is like playing a video game of the job that you're going to do, and you use that to get you to an initial standard where we know that you're safe enough to progress to start talking to real aeroplanes. Because in a simulator, if things go wrong, it doesn't matter, we just all say stop and everything's fine, and obviously you can't be that in the real world. When you move on to real life training, and it is hard, the first time you speak to a real plane, because with the best one in the world, simulators as well are manned by our own staff, and generally one person will provide the voice of lots of different pilots pretending to be lots of different aircraft, which is great. But then when you go and talk in the real world, and suddenly you're talking to people from all kind of nationalities with lots of different accents, says me with a very northern accent. I know southerners around go, what did you just say? But even elements like that take a little bit of getting used to. But you never plug in on a sector on your own until we're certain that you're safe. So you will sit down and you will have a qualified instructor with you, and the qualified instructor will have a special box of tricks in their hand that allows them to override the radio transmissions that you make, override the telephone calls you make, so that if you make a mistake, if something is wrong, it can be corrected. And some mistakes need to be corrected immediately, because there could be an impact immediately. Some mistakes you can let develop a little bit and say, is that the best plan for doing something? One of the things about air traffic is there are lots of ways of solving the same problem, and different controllers will see it differently. And all of those ways are very valid. And there's no, just because it isn't the way I would do it doesn't mean it isn't right. And so we have to try and give people leeway to develop their own ways of thinking and their own styles of controlling, to understand how to be able to do that job and be successful at that job. But we have very experienced people behind them then who will give them advice and guidance and be there to catch any immediate mistakes and change them immediately if necessary, to maintain the safety of the sector. And there's lots of safety assurance work behind that to make sure that all our training is very safe. And you then train for quite a long period of time, depending on which sectors you do. And it's quite intense, and you go through various phases of training. And in the very initial phase, you'll only be expected to work just a few planes, fairly quiet level of traffic, not much interaction, not many problems. And you'll get to the point where it's a bit busier and you'll be expected to handle certain things yourself. And then you get towards the end of your training, get to a point where we should really be able to sit back and just kind of almost just watch and make sure, just be that safety net. And then eventually you have to go through an independent exam with an examiner from our regulator and an examiner from our local unit who does that sector, who will watch you control, ask you lots of questions to make sure that you have the full understanding of everything you're taking on, give you a license, hopefully, all being well, and then that will be that. And then you get to go on and control on your own for the rest of your career, hopefully. And there's always that first moment when you say something the first time you make a mistake yourself when you're controlling on your own, and you almost wait for the telling off from behind you, and you suddenly realize they're not there anymore and it's down to you. And those mistakes are often very easily rectified and often not critical. And so, but that's the training allows us to remind ourselves that we've got to check and double check everything we do. And we cross check every instruction we make. Every instruction we make is recorded both on the radio, but also on the strips, so that we know what we're telling the aircraft to do. And does that correlate with what the screen's telling us the pilots are doing, and all of that. So once you've got all of that in place, then you're released on your own. And it is still one of the few, I think, jobs for life that you can have. If you enjoy controlling and you can control aeroplanes, the chances are at the moment, until AI takes over us completely and does me out of a job, which I think is some years away, you're in a position where you can stay in the very rare position that you could stay in a job for the rest of your life if you're happy doing it. And lots of people do. I'm not unusual, having done so long in my company, that there are plenty of people who've worked 25, 30, 35, 40 years in our company, controlling aeroplanes from the day they qualified to the day they retire.
That's impressive. And what I really quite liked the idea of was the the ability for you to be able to make mistakes and almost look over your shoulder and have somebody there. We've heard a lot it's become fashionable, I guess, to talk about just culture quite a lot. Do you think that that's what you've got there in air traffic control, that if you make a mistake, it's easier to put it's easy for you to put your hand up and say, look, I've got an issue, we need to solve it?
Yes, very much so. And I think one of the things, because everyone's been through the same training and everybody works next to each other all the time, we're always looking out for each other anyway, both from a personal point of view of if everyone's all right, but also how busy is their sector? Do they need extra help? Do I need to get them extra help? Do the supervisors need to come down? And yeah, that you know, when that we have a very open reporting culture and a very good just culture, that we will, if mistakes are made or we see that actually, say, a particular procedure is causing us an issue that we're having to work around rather than work with, you know, we can report about that and it will be investigated fully and looked at, and conclusions will be drawn. Any incident that occurs is looked at very carefully, both from a technical point of view and a professional point of view, whether it's a judgment error, whether it's a you know, something that's happened with the kit or something that's happened with a plane or whatever that might be. And there will quite often be separate human factors interviews within that to kind of try and understand how people reacted the way they did to the situation as it developed and what we needed to do. So you're never alone in air traffic. There's always somebody around to help you. There's always somebody around to support you. And when things aren't perfect or things do go wrong, we look into it really, really carefully to try and make sure that doesn't happen again, because nobody ever wants anyone to be in that situation. So it's a very open place to be, which I really, really think is important.
Yeah, and that must lend itself to the longevity of people feeling like they can stay in that role and do their job.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to come in. We do a lot. We put a lot of effort towards just culture. You know, I mentioned before, we do our safety culture survey every 2 years. Just what is one of the elements within the survey, and we take the findings very, very seriously. So there's always activity happening somewhere in the business, trying to make sure we have the best just culture we can. And we are very open in terms of, I think that the whole industry, I think it's one of the hallmarks of aviation is that desire to learn from mistakes. Every time there's an incident, every time something happens, we take it very seriously. Because, as Fran said, we investigate pretty much every single incident, depending on severity. We can't investigate every single thing, but all the big ones get investigated. Quite a lot of the ones that do cost medium or even low impact get investigated. And we always strive to learn lessons from that and make changes and improve.
And lessons from other places as well. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but things like wibbling and the controlling elements of that, and there were so many lessons learned from around that of how we manage sectors and how we manage people when they're working in a night shift configuration and different ways of working and things like that get learned, and that happens every day. And I think that one of the best things I think is that we all have a sense that the safety job is never done, and it's always evolving. And if we don't keep it evolving, we'll miss something, and nobody wants to miss something. We all love going away on holiday as much as the people that we control going away on holiday, and nobody wants that to stop. And at the end of the day, it's our livelihood. It's really important to us that aviation continues and grows in an appropriate manner so that we can still have a job to do. And it's the only right way to do that is to look at when issues arise and do our best to fix them.
The other thing that I think it's worth mentioning is actually this year we are celebrating 20 years of our critical incident stress management program, which was, again, the first of its kind, started at NATS, and through the years we've done loads of things. Fundamentally, what it is, it's a peer support type system where we have people trained across the business to provide, this we call diffusers, stress diffusers. If you had a stressful situation, an incident, it's just people that have the training to be able to have that almost first pass to helping you diffuse the stress, calm you down, get you to a nicer place, then you can sort of digest what happened and seek further support if need to. And we've been doing that for 20 years. It's only been mandated for air navigation service providers to have one of these programs for the last 5 or 6, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Ours is in place for 20 years, and it's incredibly successful. And we expanded it to every single employee in the company, whilst it's only mandatory for operational staff. It's really a very strong program that's been running for a long time, very successful.
Cool. You both touched upon the use of like AI and things like that, looking into the future. So, Nuno, from your perspective, what future technologies are you excited about seeing integrated into this role? I kind of got an image of on the Matrix where they've got the big spike that they can put in the back of the head and just directly connect you to the system. Is that on the radar at all?
Maybe not for this century, Barry. Eventually, who knows? No, I think some of the more exciting things that seem possible are in the realms of sort of big data, machine learning, that sort of stuff. I'm very skeptical of AI. I think it's most people say AI when they mean machine learning.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there is a lot of room for machine learning to accelerate some of the activities we do. I think there's a lot of room for machine learning to be a helpful aid, a helpful co-pilot or co-controller, providing some ideas and guidance and indications that the controls can then go, yes, that sounds like a good idea, or not. And we already do a little bit of that. We have a system developed in-house, iFacts. Fran, you would have played with iFacts. It's been around for what, 15 years coming up to now?
Yeah.
Where it does a little bit of this, where you can sort of model, well, I could do that, and it sort of gives you a prediction over time, the conflicts you're going to get, the issues you're going to have, and you can play with it and say, well, for that plan, I'll do that one instead. So I think it's a next iteration of that, where the system is a bit faster, a bit clever, can give you some better options. I think that's where we're going. I think from the HF side, it's been impressive how things like eye tracking have progressed. I've been hearing about eye tracking for the last 10, 15 years, and it's always a nice, it's interesting, and you can do some stuff with it. But the technology just keeps evolving. So one of the things we're trying to assess this year is if the technology has reached a point where we can actually start using it in live ops. And we can see massive potential advantages of doing so. Because you can start tracking where the controls are looking at, how long are they fixated on a certain point. It'll be great for training. Fran mentioned scanning patterns. Many years ago, we did a piece of research trying to see if there was an ideal scanning pattern that we could teach controllers. But as Fran said, there really isn't. It's sort of learn your own way. If we had eye tracking, that would have been really simple. But even now, we can go. And Fran, I hear this sort of secondhand. Perhaps you have some stories to share. But one of the things that we hear loads in our human performance coaching is things like you're not scanning your strips. Well, eye tracking, you can immediately see, well, you didn't look at it. Yeah. I have the eye tracking that shows you never looked at your strips. You need to do that. Yeah. And you could ask, why didn't you look? What was distracting? You have all of the correlation possibility in terms of what was on the radar, what was on the strips, your eye tracking, and you can start, again, it's big data. There is loads of it we could do with it. And I think that's where we're going to really see the change in ATC in the next 10, 15, 20 years. It's time to bring that data together, draw those correlations, and find some metrics and ways to accelerate our training, reduce the number of incidents, all of that stuff.
That sounds really sensible, because I think one of the most difficult things about ATC, occasionally one of the most enjoyable, occasionally not, is the fact that it's never the same twice. Even though it's always the same twice, it's never the same twice, because 20 or 30 seconds different from when an aircraft takes off will make a complete difference about the interactions it's going to have with other aircraft as it flies along its route. And so that changes. And then you throw in things like occasional pilot errors where they've dialed in the wrong thing, or you might throw in, say, a weather day when nothing suddenly wants to fly on the routes you expect it to fly on. And that's where some of the automation falls down, and some of where the human being and their ability to react to that changing situation really helps. But I think that Nuno is absolutely right, that the more we can help support our training to be more successful and find ways of understanding it, describing what you do and trying to teach someone how to do what you do, when you don't always completely understand it yourself, some of it's just innate within you. It's really difficult to kind of to help develop some of those skills. And I think that's where some of the sort of the human factors aspects, that those human performance aspects, can really help us in the way we train people, so that it gives them all sorts of different options to find to suit them, so that they can find the best way of doing things for them.
Is there any bits of tech out there, Fran, that you've maybe seen in a movie or something like that, and you think, God, that would just be so cool for me to use as an operator to make my job maybe not easier, but a bit cooler. Is that?
Can I have some thought control? Then the pilots just do what I say without me actually having to tell them. That would be awesome. But I don't know about technology. I've never really seen it. And actually, a lot of the things that we were talked about when I first started have gradually come true and within my career time. So I can really see the way things are moving on all the time. And there's all sorts of the support that we get now to do the job has enabled us to expand to be the busiest we've ever been. And this summer's anticipated to be the busiest air traffic summer we've ever seen. So I think to be in a position where we can manage that from where we were even 25 years ago, I think is phenomenal.
Cool. Well, that's been a fascinating insight. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll get into the final three.
Before Barry gets to the final three, my name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the Human Factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping EHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
it depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final three.
Still makes me giggle, that advert. There's this like...
That's brilliant. I really do.
There's like programming issue that we're not actually doing it every week at the moment because both Nick and I, from the UK perspective, we record it from 10 till midnight on a Thursday night. When I was out with one of my client teams last night, and so by the time I got back in from the pub, I didn't think it was the best idea to go live on a recording. So a couple of weeks out.
You never know, could flow really well.
I have threatened it, then thought, maybe professional reputations might not be the best. But you never know. We'll see. So this is everybody who I interview, we ask these final three questions of everybody, so you two don't get away with it, and we'll just go straight into them. So, Fran, from yourself first, what is your go-to book or paper that you use repeatedly? That could be technical or fiction, if that keeps you calm and
So I'm going to cheat and do two. From a professional point of view, it's always what we call the MATS. The MATS is the Manual of Air Traffic Services. It's divided into two parts. Part one is the general of how air traffic is done across the whole of the UK. And the part two is about the rules, the procedures, the way it works at your actual centre. So the MATS part two is our go-to for anytime we need to check up on what we're doing, how we're doing it, making sure that we're doing it right according to the rules and regulations and everything that's been set up. But I love to read and I love a bit of fiction. So I'd be quite happy with Jane Austen's complete novels to keep me happy for the rest of my life. It's my escapism.
Fair enough. Nuno, what about yourself?
Oh, it's a difficult question, Barry, because I love books. I love reading. I've never had I did have a favourite many years ago. A Portuguese book that you would have heard of. It's called Zmaias, and it was mandatory reading at high school. But it's fantastic, and I've read it about 5, 6, 7 times now, and I always get something out of it. It's from the 1800s, and it's a romantic novel. But it's like a correct caricature of Portugal at the time. So it's fascinating. I think professionally, it has to be ISO 9241.
Fair.
I've used it to exhaustion over many years, less so recently, but I talk about it a lot, and I send a lot of people to go and read it and find bits of it. And I forget how many parts it has, 17, 19, 25 parts now, it just keeps growing. But it's I find a really strong piece of literature if you're doing any sort of design work.
Cool. So then, Nuno, if you could go back to earlier in your career, choose whenever it is that's most suitable for you. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Slow down. It's a marathon, not a race. I think I'll expand. And I see this a lot in human factors professionals. I think because everyone's so passionate about what they do and they want to do a really good job. I think we all perhaps get a little bit almost blinded by what we're doing and how important we think it is. And we really get passionate and we really push for it. And I think sometimes that's to the detriment of what we're trying to achieve. And I think to the detriment of the profession sometimes, because you're so passionate about getting it done and it's so important that sometimes it's just a design feature in a massive system. And there's loads of design iterations. I think that was a lesson that took me a while to get. I think it's a lesson that I've seen many human factors professionals struggle to learn as well.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's resonating quite a lot with me, that one. Fran, what about yourself?
I think I would just, at whatever stage, go back to telling my younger self to just believe in myself and believe that I am good enough to do what I do. I don't always believe that. It takes me a little bit of time sometimes to understand my own levels of competence and confidence in my abilities to do my job. Actually, I've never not achieved what I wanted to achieve. So the sky should be the limit, really. Just believe in yourself and go for it.
Cool. Go the other way now. So go to the, you're retiring out of your career. What would you like to be remembered for?
I'd like to be remembered for making a difference to the people that I worked with, for helping the controllers that I trained and the people whose training I oversaw get better, get their jobs, enjoy their jobs, love what they do, and to move the system on so that I leave it a safer place with more capacity than it was when I started with it.
That needs to be put on a plaque or something. That's amazing. What about yourself?
Long plaque. Very similar. Making the world better within the realm of what I can do. And I think that has changed over the years and over the various jobs that I've done. I started trying to implement changes in projects and trying to make the world better through that project, that activity, that design feature, that assurance activity. And then as progressed through the career, it was about multiple projects. And then it sort of became, started managing teams, and it's through that team. And I think now with a team of 25, 26 professionals, it's possibly closer to what Fran described. It's about making sure that I am helping all of those 26 people to be the best they can be. And between the 27 of us, we can make the world better.
Brilliant. No, I'm really blown away. Actually, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to both of you and having both of you on at the same time to give us it almost feels like we've had both sides of the coin to get that insight into air traffic control, and I certainly feel like I've learned a lot. So thank you ever so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. If listeners wanted to get in touch with either of you, how would we go around doing it? Nuno, I think possibly you might be the best vector to allow people to get in touch with you.
Yes, LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. I'm not on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or pick another social media site, but I am on LinkedIn. Or otherwise, just find the NATS website, reach in through the general contact, and it will make its way to myself or Fran. No doubt.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I'm not on any form of social media. I'm not even on LinkedIn because I'm very happy and not looking for a job, so I don't need it. So from that point of view, I'm relatively uncontactable. But yeah, NATS is available on Twitter and on its usual social channels. And if you wanted to get in touch with either of us, I'm sure if you did that, our comms teams would make sure that we got the messages and would help us along with that.
That's fantastic. And it's worth noting as well that if you go and listen to the NATS altitude webinars, Fran does go host quite a few of them, so it's worth going and listening to some of the other topics that she's hosted on. That was the main reason for doing this, so I could actually get into this seat and But no, thank you both ever so much. It's been really appreciated. And thank you all for listening and watching. Do comment, like, share, put your recommendations in, and because without you, other people wouldn't be able to find what it is that we do. So without further ado, thank you for all of that, and we shall see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.